The salary increase he promised me was never delivered. It didn't disappear quietly. It evaporated under fluorescent lights and corporate applause. You're probably wondering how something like that could happen. Right before I tell you exactly what he did next. I'm curious, where are you listening from today, and what's the temperature like where you are? And if stories like this resonate with you, please consider subscribing to the channel. I'll continue telling the story right now. The town hall was supposed to be a celebration of operational resilience. Victor Langford stood center stage, sleeves rolled up like he personally wrestled compliance risk into submission. He talked about discipline, about fiscal responsibility, about leadership. Then someone asked about merit increases. Victor smiled. Calm, polished, dangerous. Costs need to stay tightly controlled this quarter, he said. And then he looked straight at me. Some people need to learn patience before asking for more. A few awkward laughs scattered across the room. I'm Eden Brooks, Senior Financial Compliance Analyst, the person who designed and operates the entire compliance dashboard that keeps this company off federal watch lists. I built the real-time risk alerts. I structured the SEC reporting framework. I manage the internal audit pipeline. If my system fails, we don't just miss numbers. We face investigations. Victor Langford is our Chief Operations Officer. He doesn't build systems. He signs reports. He presents to the board. He controls budgets and compensation. 3 months ago, Victor put it in writing: eliminate the $2.8 million SEC exposure tied to reporting gaps, and my salary would increase 18%. I eliminated it. I also uncovered an $11.4 million discrepancy buried in logistics allocations, an error big enough to attract federal attention. But then, he deliberately erased his promise like a thief afraid of being caught. I reopened his email. Fix this. 18%. You have my word. Then I scrolled down to the attached compensation policy. There it was, language Victor must have skimmed. Compensation adjustments tied to measurable risk reduction become enforceable upon executive confirmation. He had confirmed the results in writing, which meant the raise wasn't a favor, it was an obligation, and he had just denied it in public. From that moment on, the picture sharpened. What I'm about to share includes dramatized elements, enhanced with AI to shape the narrative and highlight the lessons behind it. It isn't about any real individual or organization. I hope the story resonates with you. And if tonight isn't your night for heavy truths, log off early, get some rest, and take care of yourself. The rebranding started the week after the town hall. Not publicly, not dramatically, just small, precise cuts designed to shrink me without leaving fingerprints. First, I was removed from the quarterly strategy meeting. No explanation. Just a calendar update that no longer included my name. Then our compliance software expansion budget was temporarily reallocated. Finally, an internal memo described my role as operational support to executive initiatives. Operational support. I'm Eden Brooks, the person who built the compliance infrastructure that keeps this company clear of federal penalties. I manage the reporting protocols, the audit triggers, the regulatory cross-checks. But now, on paper, I was a helper when I asked Victor about it. He leaned back in his chair, calm and patronizing. Let's not confuse execution with leadership, he said. Leadership is broader. That was his word. 3 months earlier, this same man had called me the firewall between us and federal exposure. He'd said it in a board prep meeting when the SEC inquiry was escalating. Back then, my work was critical. Now it was clerical. I didn't argue. I documented. That night, I downloaded the latest board deck from the shared drive. Slide after slide highlighted operations risk optimization. The dashboards looked familiar because they were mine. The language mirrored my internal memos. Even the risk heat maps were identical to the templates I designed. Out of curiosity, I checked the file properties. Author Eden Brooks, last modified Eden Brooks. The metadata didn't lie. He could rebrand me as support, but he couldn't erase the origin of the work. The moment I saw my name in the metadata, the anger settled into something far more useful: clarity. I stopped reacting and started building a timeline. That night, I logged into the document management system and downloaded full version histories for every compliance dashboard iteration over the past 12 months. Each timestamp mattered. Each edit trail told a story that couldn't be rewritten with executive spin. I exported email confirmations where Victor approved implementation milestones, especially the one that explicitly tied measurable risk reduction to my compensation adjustment. I saved them as PDFs and backed them up twice. Then I pulled the system logs. Every structural change to the compliance architecture required administrator authentication. Mine. The audit flags. The vendor cross-check protocols. The automated reporting triggers. Each line of development carried my credentials. I extracted the logs, cross-referenced them with the board presentation dates, and built a clean, chronological record showing cause and effect. Performance reviews came next. For 3 consecutive years, Victor rated me exceeds expectations. He praised my ownership mindset and critical risk leadership. I downloaded those evaluations and stored them alongside the rest, if I was suddenly operational support. The paper trail disagreed. By the end of the week, my timeline stretched across 47 pages. No commentary, no emotion, just documented fact layered against public claims. Then internal audit emailed. The subject line read, "Clarification request, compliance initiative ownership." The message was neutral in tone, almost clinical. They were reviewing executive summaries tied to recent risk mitigation reporting and needed confirmation regarding primary implementation leadership. I reread it twice before responding. Yes. I managed the compliance architecture redesign. Yes. I implemented the automated reporting protocols. Yes. I coordinated directly with regulatory counsel during the SEC exposure review. I attached selected documentation. Nothing excessive. Just enough. An hour later, a second email arrived. Audit now requested supporting materials related to the compensation review tied to that same initiative. That wasn't routine. Compensation discussions usually stayed within HR and executive channels. If audit was asking, it meant they weren't just reviewing performance claims, they were tracing incentives. And incentives change everything if audit was tracing incentives. The quarterly review became a performance in more ways than one. Victor stood at the front of the boardroom, laser pointer in hand, projecting calm authority. Slide after slide highlighted operations-led risk optimization. My dashboards filled the screen heat maps, variance trackers, automated SEC cross-check protocols rebranded as strategic leadership outcomes. He spoke smoothly. Under my direction, we reduced regulatory exposure by 38% and stabilized reporting accuracy across divisions. Under my direction, I sat along the side wall, notebook closed, face neutral, halfway through the presentation. One of the board members leaned forward. Who implemented this compliance architecture? The question was simple, direct. Victor didn't miss a beat. It was a cross-functional effort. He said, "My team executed the framework. Executed, no names, no ownership." The meeting moved on, but the air shifted. I could feel it. 2 days later, internal audit circulated a follow-up summary. Their review had identified inconsistencies between the executive slide deck and the underlying file records. Specifically, authorship metadata and implementation logs did not align with the attribution language used in board materials. That was the first crack. Victor called me into his office within the hour. He closed the door gently, which was how I knew he was angry. "You're destabilizing leadership," he said quietly. "Audit doesn't escalate like this without internal noise." I responded to a clarification request. I replied, "With documentation." He exhaled sharply. "You need to understand optics. This creates unnecessary tension at the board level." Optics. "So accuracy is tension now?" I asked. His jaw tightened. "This isn't about accuracy. It's about structure." Structure meant hierarchy. Hierarchy meant him. Later that afternoon, he sent a follow-up email summarizing our alignment discussion. The language framed me as overly procedural, and suggested I misunderstood executive messaging. He copied internal audit and human resources. That wasn't subtle. It was escalation, because once HR enters the thread, the narrative stops being strategic. It becomes disciplinary. And I realized we were no longer discussing authorship. We were positioning for consequences. Once HR was copied, the shift from strategic disagreement to personal evaluation happened quickly. My annual performance review, originally scheduled for the end of the quarter, was suddenly accelerated for alignment purposes. Victor delivered it himself. He sat across from me with a file that looked thicker than usual. His tone was measured, almost sympathetic. "This year reflects some strengths," he began, "but also areas for growth." Areas for growth. The rating at the top read meets expectations. Not exceeds, not exceptional, just adequate, under comments. He had added collaboration concerns and tendency to over-index on personal compensation outcomes. One line stood out: Eden appears overly focused on compensation rather than broader organizational objectives. Overly focused. I built the system that protected the company from federal exposure. I identified 8-figure discrepancies. I worked nights to close regulatory gaps. But asking for the 18% he promised now made me self-interested. I kept my voice steady. "Can you clarify what collaboration concerns you're referring to?" He folded his hands. "Escalating documentation to audit without leadership alignment creates friction. Translation accuracy without permission." I left his office without raising my voice. Anger is loud. I needed precision. That afternoon, I submitted formal retaliation documentation to HR. I attached my prior 3 performance reviews. Each rated exceeds expectations. In those evaluations, Victor himself had written that I demonstrated exceptional ownership, cross-functional leadership, and indispensable regulatory oversight. The contrast spoke for itself. HR scheduled a review meeting within 48 hours. During that session, the representative frowned slightly while flipping between documents. "Your historical ratings don't align with this year's downgrade," she said carefully. "They align with measurable results," I replied. 2 days later, HR informed me they would expand the review to assess consistency in executive evaluations. Then something unexpected happened. A former compliance analyst, someone who had left the company the previous year, submitted a written statement to HR. In it, she described a similar pattern: strong performance ratings downgraded after raising concerns about executive reporting. Victor hadn't just adjusted my narrative, he had a history of doing it. And now that history was documented. If you don't agree with Victor downgrading my performance and labeling me over-focused on compensation after I documented the truth, leave a 1 in the comments, because speaking up, even here, is how we remind leaders that accountability still matters. By the time HR expanded their review, I knew it was time to stop defending myself and start presenting facts. I requested a formal meeting with legal and compensation governance. Not emotional, not confrontational, structured. When we sat down, I placed a printed copy of the executive compensation policy on the table and highlighted the relevant section. Section 4.3, I said evenly. Compensation adjustments tied to measurable risk mitigation become enforceable upon written executive confirmation of results. Then I slid forward the email Victor had sent 3 months earlier. Fix the SEC exposure. 18% increase. You have my word. Below that message was his written confirmation that the risk had been eliminated and reporting stabilized. Legal counsel reviewed both documents quietly. No one spoke for nearly a full minute. Victor leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "That language is aspirational," he said. "It reflects intent, not obligation." Counsel did not look at him when responding. "The clause uses the word enforceable," she said. "It does not reference discretion after confirmation." Victor shifted. "Compensation decisions are contextual, not when tied to confirmed performance triggers." Counsel replied. The room grew very still. The compliance system had eliminated a $2.8 million regulatory exposure. That wasn't subjective. It was documented in filings submitted under his signature. The performance condition was met. The executive confirmation existed, which meant the adjustment was automatic. Victor attempted one more pivot. If this becomes precedent, it complicates leadership flexibility. Flexibility was another word for selective enforcement. 2 days later, Compensation Governance issued a preliminary notice. Executive-level bonus disbursements for the quarter would be temporarily frozen pending review of performance-linked compensation triggers. The executive bonus pool, not analyst adjustments, not departmental budgets, executive bonuses. Victor didn't call me after that. He didn't need to, because once executive compensation is paused, the conversation shifts from optics to liability, and liability travels upward, not down. For the first time since the town hall, I wasn't defending my value. I was activating the terms he signed. Freezing the executive bonus pool changed the temperature of the building. What had started as a compensation dispute was now a financial examination. Internal audit expanded their scope beyond compliance ownership and into performance-linked reporting. That's when the real pressure began. Their preliminary findings were clinical, almost understated. Inflated metrics tied to operational efficiency. Reclassified cost savings shifted between quarters to meet bonus thresholds. Executive incentive payouts calculated using adjusted figures rather than finalized reconciliations. Nothing dramatic, just numbers that didn't line up. The issue wasn't whether the company performed well, it was how performance had been presented. And when those presentations intersected with executive compensation triggers, Victor moved quickly to control the narrative. In a leadership update circulated to senior management, he framed the situation as a misinterpretation of reporting methodology fueled by individual dissatisfaction. In a smaller meeting, he was less diplomatic. "She's retaliating," he said, referring to me. "This is about her raise." That statement made its way back to audit, so I provided what they hadn't yet requested: the full timeline. I submitted a structured chronology beginning with the SEC exposure identification, followed by dashboard implementation milestones, executive confirmations, performance reports presented to the board, and the subsequent compensation denial. Every claim aligned with timestamps, every timestamp aligned with documented action. No commentary, just sequence. Audit cross-referenced the timeline with financial reporting and executive bonus calculations. The overlap was impossible to ignore. Adjusted savings projections appeared in board slides within days of internal confirmation emails. Bonus multipliers were triggered using those projections before final reconciliation closed. Pressure shifted upward within a week. The board's governance committee requested a special session. The term used in the notice was formal fiduciary review. That phrase carries weight. Fiduciary duty isn't about hurt feelings or departmental politics. It's about obligation to shareholders and truthful representation of company performance. Victor had tried to reduce the issue to personal retaliation. Now it was governance. And governance doesn't argue. It investigates. When the board scheduled the special session, the atmosphere shifted from pressure to fracture. This wasn't another executive alignment meeting. It was a governance review. And everyone understood the difference. The governance committee convened with internal audit, legal, compensation, and 2 independent directors who rarely attended operational briefings. That alone told me the structure was beginning to strain. I wasn't in the room, but the summary reached me within hours. Audit presented their findings in neutral language. Reporting metrics tied to operational efficiency had been overstated in executive presentations. Cost savings had been reclassified across reporting periods to align with bonus thresholds. Performance-triggered compensation adjustments were selectively enforced. In simpler terms, misrepresentation, governance violations, and compensation manipulation. Victor responded the way executives do when cornered: controlled, composed, reframing. "This is a miscommunication between reporting layers," he said. "There was no intent to mislead. The numbers were contextualized differently at various stages." Miscommunication. The board chair didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "This is not miscommunication," she said evenly. "This is attribution and incentive alignment." That statement landed harder than any accusation. Governance isn't about tone, it's about duty. Fiduciary responsibility requires accurate representation of performance when compensation is tied to that performance. The committee's concern wasn't internal disagreement. It was whether executive conduct had compromised reporting integrity. Victor attempted one final pivot. He argued that operational leadership required flexibility in presentation, that early projections often evolve, that compensation frameworks are complex. Legal interrupted him. Complexity does not excuse inconsistency. Counsel said, especially when compensation is implicated. The room, I was told, went quiet after that. By the end of the session, the governance committee formally documented potential breaches of fiduciary duty and requested independent validation of executive reporting practices over the prior 2 quarters. Then came the shift no one expected. The board voted to engage external counsel. Once outside attorneys enter a governance review, the conversation stops being internal correction. It becomes exposure assessment. Exposure isn't managed through messaging. It's managed through liability containment. For the first time since this began, the issue was no longer about my raise. It was about structural integrity. And structures don't crack loudly at first. They separate along their weakest fault lines. Once external counsel completed their review, the waiting ended. The board convened for what was described as a final determination session. By then, the findings were no longer theoretical. The independent review confirmed breach of fiduciary duty tied to executive reporting practices. Performance metrics had been misreported in board materials. Compensation triggers had been applied selectively. Retaliatory behavior linked to performance downgrades had been documented in HR records. The language was precise, deliberate, unavoidable. Victor was invited to respond before the vote. I wasn't present, but the summary circulated through leadership within hours. He maintained that the reporting variances were contextual interpretations. He characterized the compensation dispute as an unfortunate escalation driven by personal dissatisfaction. He denied retaliatory intent. Intent wasn't the issue. Governance is outcome-based. When fiduciary duty is breached, it doesn't matter whether the breach felt justified in the moment. It matters that the obligation to shareholders and accurate disclosure was compromised. The vote was conducted immediately after deliberation. 6 in favor of termination, 3 opposed, majority carried, under the terms of his executive contract. Confirmed misconduct triggered the forfeiture clause. No severance, no deferred bonus payout, no accelerated equity vesting. The misconduct provision was clear. He left the building that afternoon. There was no dramatic escort, no raised voices, just controlled silence and a closed office door. An internal memo followed within the hour. Victor Langford was no longer with the organization. An interim operations lead had been appointed pending restructuring. I read it once and closed my laptop. The raise he denied me had started this. But this wasn't about 18% anymore. It was about structural correction. Then came the unexpected development. 2 days later, the Compensation Committee announced a comprehensive review of all executive-level adjustments approved during the prior fiscal year. The rationale cited alignment consistency and governance integrity. That meant every bonus calculation, every incentive trigger, every reported savings claim would be re-examined. The scope had widened beyond one decision. Justice, I realized, doesn't explode. It compounds. And when it reaches critical mass, it doesn't just remove a person. It recalibrates the system. The official adjustment came through on a quiet Tuesday morning. Compensation Governance issued a retroactive salary correction reflecting the 18% increase, plus back pay calculated from the original confirmation date. The transfer hit my account before noon. No ceremony, no apology, just numbers aligning with policy. An hour later, Legal forwarded a formal acknowledgement memo clarifying authorship of the compliance architecture redesign. My name was listed as primary architect and implementation lead. The board materials would be updated accordingly. Accurate attribution. They called it I read the memo twice, not because I doubted it, because accuracy, when delayed, feels different than praise. It feels structural, by then. The industry had taken notice. Word travels quietly in compliance circles. A week after Victor's termination, I received a call from a mid-sized firm expanding its risk division. They had reviewed my published governance documentation and wanted to discuss leadership opportunities. The offer was Direct Director of Risk Strategy, 34% salary increase, full oversight of regulatory architecture and reporting controls, direct access to the board. I didn't negotiate much. I accepted. On my last day at the old office, I packed my desk slowly. There was no hostility in the hallway, just distance, systems recalibrating. Corporate America talks about visibility and voice, about who owns the microphone in the room. But power isn't in the microphone. It's in the documentation that survives after the sound fades. He controlled the budget. I controlled the evidence. What this experience taught me is simple, but not easy. Your value means nothing if it only lives in someone else's words. In corporate America, praise is cheap. Documentation is power. I believed that doing exceptional work would automatically translate into respect and fair compensation. It doesn't. Not unless you protect your work, track your impact, and understand the rules that govern the system you operate in. If you were in that position, publicly dismissed, privately undervalued, what would you do? Would you stay silent to keep the peace? Or would you gather evidence and stand steady? I'm genuinely curious, where are you listening from right now? If this story resonates with you, consider subscribing. Not for me, for the next person who needs to hear that quiet strength can win. A single subscribe, a comment, a like, or a share might reach someone sitting in their car after work, questioning their worth. You have more influence than you think. Sometimes spreading a story is how we protect someone else's future, and that makes you the hero in ways no title ever could. This story was fully created and produced by our team. We do not copy or borrow content from any other channel. Thank you for staying with us and listening until the end.